Hmm. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Truma is Pedig Dalid Halacha Zayin. We're learning today Daf Mem Aleph, and we left off on Daf Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amud, beginning with Bar Pedoya. Now, let's quickly review. Firstly, we had in the Mishnah, in Halacha Zayin, a 3-way Machlokes Tanoim regarding the following case. You had, as an example, one black Truma fig. It fell into another 100 chulin figs. So normally you would say, oh, that's perfect. That is the ratio needed for bittul. Aber, however, the 100 chulin figs were not all black. Let's begin with the example. They were 50-50. And being that a black fig is discernible when it's amongst the white ones, so therefore, I'm going out of the order. Rabbi Eliezer says that the truma fig is not bottle. You don't have 100-1, you only have 50-1. Rabbi Akiva holds that if the person, the owner of the black fig, the owner of the truma fig, doesn't know, he never knew, he doesn't know what color is the truma fig, even though it was either black or white, even though the chulin figs are part and part, there it's bottle. But if you know what color is the truma fig, then it is not bottle. And Rabbi Yoshua, which is the first opinion brought in the Mishnah, which is the Tana that we're going to be focusing on, at least in the beginning of today's daf, Rabbi Yoshua has this very unique leniency. Yes, you know, as in our example, that the one that fell in, the truma one, was black. Nevertheless, it's bottle because it fell into 100 chulin figs. The rationale behind it that we spoke out when we began the Mishnah in the Marafulda is actually going to be the opening of today's shir. And as we already spoke out, that since a person is able to mix up or to crush all of the figs, turning them all into, let's say, a paste, and if it reaches that point, you no longer could discern black or white. In other words, since it's possible to bring all of the figs into a state where taka you will have the ratio of 100-1, everything is all farmished, even though you did not do it, even though you know what color was the truma fig, nevertheless it's bottle. Okay. Now we had on Daf Mem Amid Beis in the bottom of the Amid, we had Shimon Barba. Actually, in the Shinun Ischais, sometimes he's referred to as Reb Shimon Barba, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and he made a statement that at least made it easier to accept the sheet of Rabbi Yoshua, and that is, I'm quoting his words, "V'hi shenafla shchayra achas l'toich shtayim." Why are we so lenient? I mean, at the end of the day, come on, the truma is black, 50 are white. Why would you have the ratio? So says Shimon ben Va, because since, as we keep on saying, truma is bottle beroiv, so there has to be at least 2 chulin black, into which fell 1 truma black. Forget about the 100. Since you have the ratio needed, black you can't discern. It's mixed up. You can't take it out. You don't know which one it is. Since it's bottle biblically, that's why we can rely on this leniency that since you can make it into a paste, then you can take away the color. Right, and then we had the other nuance on top of Daf Mem Aleph, Rab Ze'era and Rav Mana. Okay, it's not that one fell inside 2. You have to have one falling inside 3, as we explained at the end of last year. That was that is really where we left off. Today, after the Gemara is going to give you the svara behind the leniency of Rabbi Yeshua, the Gemara is going to show you that both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, that never addressed our Mishnah directly, but from halachas that they taught regarding challah and truma, which is, just to remember a couple of very basic rules, that truma itself is exempt from challah. Truma that the kohen gets, that he turns into, if he gets grain and he makes it into a dough, truma is exempt from challah. Based on that, says the Mishnah in Masechtas Challah, that miduma, Amazing. Meduma is exempt from challah with the same ratios. That means if you did not have 100 to 1, if you had 99 sa of flour of chulin, into which falls 1 sa of flour of truma, since it's meduma, because you don't have the rabbinically required 100 to 1, none of that has to be is chayiv and challah. It's a big leniency. Now, there are statements, there's a back and forth between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, as we'll learn when we learn the daf inside. From the back and forth, the Gemara will infer that both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish argue with Shimon bar Ba. Now, shocking, they both hold, in the case of our Mishnah, if you have 99, you have 100 chulin figs. 99 are white, not 98, 99. There's only one black chulin fig. And into this mixture of 100 falls in one black truma fig. Really, if you look at the colors, you don't even have roiv. It's 1 to 1. It's not batal midoiraisa. Both Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan will hold that the Rabbi Yeshua will hold that the truma fig is batal. And they argue with Shimon bar Ba. That's going to be a big part of today's shir, even though it's small in words, but it's a very lamdish sugya. And from there, we're going to go into the following scenario that's going to be step 1 and step 2. Step 1 will be like this. I'll repeat this when we learn this inside. You had 20 chulin figs. Forget about black and white. Everything is black. Okay? 20 chulin figs, into which falls 1 truma fig. You don't have the ratio of 100 to 1. It's all meduma. What were to happen if out of this 21 figs, 1 fig fell out? What's the shaila? There is a rule that what truma needs 100 to 1 for it to become nullified, vaday truma. Safek truma goes back to the rule of bittul b'roiv, even on a rabbinic level. Perhaps if 1 falls out of the 21, could be the one that fell out was the truma. I'm not talking about what percent is that. It's 1 in 21, but it's possible. So there's already a suffix. Could be there's no truma in it at all. Do we say, will we apply the rule of suffix truma to the 20 by saying that it's not meduma anymore? Since we don't even know if truma is in here, and we began with the roiv, even if we're not going to say suffix truma in this case, now we're going to go to step number 2. What were to happen if on the current 20, right, you had 20 chulin, into 1 truma fell, 21. 1 fell out. You don't know which one fell out. Now you're back to 20. Now 21 chulin fell on top of this. Or you removed 1 from the 20 and you declared a truma for other tevel. And we know that truma cannot become truma. That would only work if what you removed was the non-truma. Would we say regarding step number 2, suffix truma is batal b'roiv, and therefore it's effective, or it's nullified? That will be today's daf. And let's start Chevra inside daf Mem Aleph, 4 lines from the top. We're not going to bring in call the Parish of Menuba Parish, but we'll speak about that when we get inside to the sugya. We're not judging the one that left. We'll get back to that. Okay. So in the beginning of the line, for people that are in the shul, the air conditioning is fixed, but someone turned on the heater, so it was 81 degrees a couple of moments ago, but slowly but surely, it's becoming back into the refrigerator that everyone so much wants. Good. Now, Bar Pedoya Amar. Why? How can Rabbi Yeshua say, if you don't have 100 in our example, just the truma that fell in the fig was black, how can you say that it's batal if the 100 chulin are not all black? The ones that are not black, vaday not truma, they should be removed from the 100. How can you use them to get to the ratio? So the words are, since toichen umater. Now toichen is a lashon lechatchila, since one is allowed to grind all of the figs together. The black, the white, the truma, the chulin. You can mix it all together, and you can bring figs into a state where they lose their color if it becomes a paste. And therefore, and at that point, it will be nullified, even though you didn't grind it. We view it as if you did grind it. And the biggest challenge against this logic, kol haroy lebila, this, since you could and potential, this we find in many other areas in halacha. I know it's not applied the way it's applied over here. The biggest issue with this answer is that there is a rule, midrabanan, that ein mevatlin iser lachatchila. That's a big rule. Many people here learn smicha. It's a din in Shulchan Aruch. So if I have a milk fell into a pot of meat, and I don't have 60 against 1, I'm not allowed to add meat lachatchila. Here, toichen umater. So I'm just going back. So from the Rishonim, the Tosfos Yontiv, and many others say, and this is a very big klal, which is not all accepted in halacha. There's a halachic debate about it. That when do we say that ein mevatlin iser lachatchila? If you are adding, like in my example, more meat, or you're adding the davar hamuter. I mean, that's the case. Why would you add more meat? Because the problem was a little bit of milk. If you only had a little bit more meat, you would have the 60-1. Or let me give an example of something not kosher fell into something kosher. All right? And again, it's mixed together in a way where you need to have the tam being bottled by shishim. Okay? So you have only 59-1. So you're going to be marabe, more heted, to come to 60-1. There is where Chazal say, ein mevatlin isel lechatchila. Over here, you're not adding anything. You're not adding anything. You're just mixing things up. That's allowed. Today, in today's daf, we're going to see that even this is not always said. I want to dafka use this svara. Even the logic of the Tosfos Yontiv, even the svara, that when you're not being marbe beheter, those are the words. When you're not being marbe beheter, then you can do something which will create a bitul. We don't always say it. We don't always say it, as we'll see soon. Okay, so that's that. Now, Zok the Gemara, this is true, this statement, Dafka bar Pedoya, Va'af al Gav, even though the same bar Pedoya had said that ein belila elo liyayin ulashemen bilvad. Now, the case of bar Pedoya is where a person had a mixture of trumos umaisres from 1 year and another year together. So even though that year number 1 and year number 2, all of the trumos umaisres are the same. You're both truma gedola, maiser rishon, maiser sheni, right? Year number 3 is maiser ani. Even year number 1 and number 2, even year number 4 and number 5. And kolchrin v'kal v'chomer, right, 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, or 5 and 6, where the trumais are different. Even if you have to remove the same thing, there's a rule: you are not toidim uma'asad from 1 year on the other. That's rule number 1. Now let me ask you a question of it. If I have tevel from year number 1, tevel from year number 2, I have tevel, and they got mixed up together. Now I'm going to give 2% no matter from which pile. It should have been in 2 piles. Am I allowed to say, since it's mixed together, I'm going to remove from the total 2%, and since it's mixed, let me say that from what I removed, it's going to work proportionately. 2%. Part of it will be from year number 1. Part of it will be from year number 2. Let's say the proportions were 50-50, so it's half and half. Let's say the proportions were 80-20, so it's 80-20. So Bar Padoya says that we don't say that. Even though you mix them up together, we don't say that by solids they are mixed so perfect that if you now remove from it trumais or maisres, we're going to say that from what you removed, you got exactly the right proportion from 1 year only on its own year, and from the other year only. You don't say that. The only time you say it, according to Bar Pedoya, is yayin and shemen. What he holds that liquids, when they blend, they become evenly distributed. Solids, even when you mix them, do not become evenly distributed. So the solution we'll learn when we get there. We're going to learn about these items. So what do you do? That's not the point. The point the Gemara wants to make is that it's ironic. Bar Pedoya was the one that introduces the concept of toichen umater. Even though when it comes to the issue of not being toichen uma'ased from 1 year on the other, Bar Padoya is the one that says that only liquids are evenly distributed. Solids are not evenly distributed. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. When you make the black and the white into a paste, you are not looking to evenly distribute them. It's not about that. So it's not evenly distributed. The only thing we need to affect, if you were to turn it into a paste, if you were to grind it up, is for you to remove the discernible color. That's the reason why there should not be bittul. Because the white, the truma was black. So how can the white be used? And Bar Padoya is moida. This is a fact that if you take figs and you put them in a grinder, at some point, you cannot tell what's white, what's black, even though it's not going to be evenly distributed. So moida hu hachem, that for what we need, which is only to take away their discernible color, shehein nivlalois, that they are going to be considered blended. They're not going to be considered blended evenly, but that's not the topic over here. In other words, don't mix Bar Padoya's limitation of blending, where what you need to accomplish is an even distribution. He holds that only liquids are evenly distributed. Here we don't need even distribution. All we need to do is to make sure that you no longer have black and white, that it all becomes the same. And therefore, Bar Padoya again was the one, he was the one that explained to Rabbi Yeshua that since Toichen Umatir, which is Mutter Lachatchila, the step number 2 is, even though you were not Toichen it, Kol Haroy Labila, Kol Haroy. It's as if you did it for these dinim, which is also difficult. How can you say that? But you can discern it. You can take out the whites. So at least Shimon Barba b'Shem Rabbi Yochanan, that's what we learned from Daf Mem Amud Beis. Says, well, hold on. You had at least 2 black, or on top of the Amud here, Daf Mem Aleph, you had at least 3 black, whatever that nuance was. So Mela was batal midoidaisa. So the Gemara says, I want you to know how lenient Rabbi Yeshua is. Well, we're not denying the fact that Shimon Barba, really, he limited Rabbi Yeshua. He says that Rabbi Yeshua is only in a case where at least you had only 98 white. There was at least 2 black. Or Rab Ze'eda, Rab Mana, you had 97 white, at least 3 black. Milsohain, the Rabbanan, from the words, from the exchange between Rabbi Yochanan and Eshlakish, we will infer that they argue, pliga, they argue with Shimon Barba, b'Shem Rabbi Yochanan. And they hold, b'Shem Rabbi Yochanan, this is going to be Rabbi Yochanan, as we'll see in a moment, that even if there were 99 white, how crazy is that? Here I have 99 white, only 1 black, only 1 chulin black. So you have 100, 99 white, 1 truma black falls in, batal. With not because it's batal midoiraisa without it. No, it's batal. Now there'll be a certain logic, but we'll get there in a moment. First of all, what was the discussion from which we make this inference? So this was a discussion that we have in Masechtas Chala. Chala, first of all, does not need to have truma. Truma does not need to have chala removed from it, and therefore even meduma is whenever truma got mixed with chulin, you don't have the ratio of 100 to 1. Even if you had 99 to 1, that's crazy, right? So you have 99 saw of flour, chulin, 1 saw flour truma. By the way, like we already mentioned, what's going to happen over here is that only a kohen can eat the whole 100, even though the owner doesn't have to gift it to the kohen. He only has to gift 1 of the 100. The other 99 he sells for a discounted price. But the kohen who receives it, since a non-kohen cannot eat it, says the Mishnah in Chala, you don't remove chala from any of this 100 saw. So that's a very big leniency. In other words, we're using the rabbinic, you think about it, the chachamim, normally they only have a power to be machmer. Truma midorais is batal beroif. If you had 1 saw of truma and it fell into a 99 saw of chulin, midoiraisa, what is it all? Chulin. That means l'chura midoiraisa should be chayv in a chala. So it's very hard to understand this Mishnah. So the Gemara says regarding this Mishnah in Chala, Kahana asked to Shmuel, Loi mistabra, hodein meduma, detanin and hachem, l'chura. For you to say that the whole meduma is exempt from challah, that's only not in the case that I said that where you had one saw of truma that fell into 99. Wouldn't work. Aviv, where would you have roiv l'chumra, roiv truma? So let me say like this. What happens if you have, I'll just give you any example. You have 21 saw of truma that fell into 20 saw of chulin. What's the majority here? Truma. That means even on a biblical level, truma is not batal. Chulin becomes like truma. So kahana ashur l'chu'ura, that is the only case where the Mishnah writes in challah that even the meduma is exempt from challah. You get it? Because even on a biblical level, the truma, the chulin did not overwhelm the truma. On a biblical level, the truma overwhelmed the chulin. It was the roiv. Okay, there, since midoraisa, there's no chulin. Okay, even the meduma, even though really you have now 41 sa. Okay, but roiv is truma. Shiruba truma. In other words, what Kahana was telling Shmuel, it was a question. It was a statement. Doesn't make sense that if the majority was chulin, even though you don't have the 100-to-1 ratio, but if the roiv was chulin and therefore the truma biblically was batal, doesn't make sense to say that the mixture should be exempt from challah. That makes a lot of sense. However, Shmuel disagreed. Amalei, says Shmuel, to Rav Kahana, to Kahana, va'anan sovar kein. I logically agreed with you. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. However, avol elom tislak la'arad Yisrael. But when you, Rav Kahana, when you go to the Holy Land, I sense he had a suspicion that it's not correct. Is acha al-lei? Who is the acha Allah? Excuse me. Lays to an individual. Ask by the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael. And a Chanami. And that's what happened. Katzolek, when Avkahana went to Eretz Yisrael, Shoma, Hado, Damar, or the Amar, Rabbi Yosi, B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, Va'afilu Sa'a, back into my case, even if you only had one Sa'a of Truma, that fell into 99 Sa'a of Chulin, which means Midoiraisa, it was super bottled. But since Midrabanan it's Meduma, still on this case, say the Chachamim in the Mishnah and Challah that Meduma, all of this current 100 Sa, which began with 99 Chulin, all of it is exempt from Challah. Said Rabbi Yechanan. And Omar Ababo, that Kach Meishiv Rabbi Shimon Lakish es Rabbi Yechanan. When Reish Lakish heard the statement of Rabbi Yechanan regarding the Mishnah of Challah, Reish Lakish challenged him. V'oisa sa'a hipoiteres es hakoil? Can't be. Reish Lakish says, no, Rabbi Yechanan, you're wrong, like we explained. When can the Mishnah say Meduma is exempt from Challah? Only if it's Meduma midoiraisa. Only if the Truma was not batal, even midoiraisa, which would be, again, whatever the numbers are, big numbers, little numbers. Roiv was Truma, miut was Chulin, fakert, you go basaroiv. So the status of the Truma goes on everything else, midoiraisa. Since midoiraisa, everything has a status of Truma, and midoiraisa, Truma is exempt from Challah, so everything is exempt from Challah. So you have a machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. Now hold on a second. Amalei, Rabbi Yechanan tells Reish Lakish, and in this conversation he quoted our Mishnah. Instead of quoting the case in our Mishnah of black and white by the figs, don't forget our Mishnah gave 3 examples which were really in Teuchen the same, the black and the white, the square and the circle, and the big and the small. And just for clarity, the big and the small would mean you had one small fig cake of Truma, one small. If you would have 100 small cakes the same, that's your case of bottle. What happened is that you had 50 other small. I'm not going to say 50 large because it's inaccurate, because the Marafuld already said you had 25 large. One large was double the size of small. In other words, in volume, you have 100 chulin against Truma in volume. In the current form of this volume, you can discern the Truma is not in the big, because the bigs are only chulin. It's the same logic that we had from Bar Padoya, Toichen Umater. Right, since if you would take the whole 101 big ones and small ones and you would all take them out of the mold and remold them, then you'll have the bittul. So even now you have the bittul. But he spoke about that case. Amalei vichi igul beigulam, the what davar body shetruma also biyadai. Okay. In the case of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua holds that the small one is batel. Now, I want to say something. You have to add one more step that he brought in over here, and you'll see why it's important. What do you do when you do have bittul? What does one do when you have bittul? If I have 100 chulin, into it falls one of truma. So it's not meduma. How much do I have right now? 101. But I knew that one of them really is property of a coin. What must I do? I have to remove one saw, even though I don't know if what I'm removing is really what used to be truma, and I have to give one to the coin. Remember that. So in the case of Igul and Igulim, we're even over here, Rabbi Shua was lenient. And therefore, it's batel, but batel does not mean that you get to keep all of them. Batel will mean is that you are going to take one small cake. Don't forget, guys, you know the truma was small. In the case that I'm giving, you have really now 51 small. You have 51 small and 25 big. That you're going to give one small to the kohen. Now, let me ask you a question. The one that the kohen receives, let me go back to the din of challah. That one that the kohen receives, does he have to remove challah from it? No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. So Rabbi Yochanan has a gevaldik karayah from here. Even if you don't go with Rabbi Yeshua, you had 50 chulin, one truma. You gave one to the kohen. Kohen will not remove challah from it. Why not? Why not? Me doiraisa, same thing. You had 50. You were mevatel the truma. Since you were mevatel the truma, how can we use that lakula to allow the kohen to get away with not removing challah from something that was bottled?
So does that mean that you are now chayav to remove the challah for the kohen?
No. That means that this rule that meduma is exempt from challah is so powerful that even if roiv ruba de ruba is chulin, whenever there's a ratio of 100 to 1, it's 100 of chulin. Nevertheless, maybe what he got was truma. The maybe is small, and you are still exempted from challah. Beautiful. Va'at omar kalu. Now, what's the reason? What's the reason behind it? In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is agreeing that the logic doesn't make sense. And the only reason what he gave is because truma bisman hazeh is midrabanan. Well, there has to be a certain midrabanan here. It's different than Shimon ben Barba's midrabanan. Just to know, if we had this already a few times since we began the Yerushalmi. Number one is kedusha l'shoina kitchel l'shaita v'loy kitchel l'asalavi. Even though the Rambam paskins that kedusha of Yerushalayim, that kedusha never left. Kedusha lo'izazim im kaima. Okay, but that's only Yerushalayim era kodesh, and that's not relevant to the laws of Trumas U'Maisros. The laws of Trumas U'Maisros, which are laws that are connected to the whole land of Israel, when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first bias, the kedusha left. When Ezra resettled the land, so then there are two ways of understanding what happened. Either we never imbued enough kedusha for us to be chayiv midoiraisa. It was only midrabanan, even bizman habayis. Or that what Ezra did when he resettled the Eden was that he invested enough kedusha in the land that only remained if the Beis Hamikdash is standing. And post Churban Beis Hamikdash, which is when Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are having this conversation, even in Eretz Yisrael, Trumas U'Maisros is midrabanan, right? It has to do also whether kol the Rambam connects it to whether, just like by challah, you have to have Kol yoishveh olel, or roiv yoishveh olel, the Rambam applies that also, bias mixas, bias kulchem, another nuance, to Trumas Umaisras. At some point, our Gemara is going with the opinion that Trumas Umaisras to begin with is midrabanan. Just like Trumas Umaisras is midrabanan, va'af hachekalu chala is only midrabanan as well. Same thing. So since chala is midrabanan, even though you know there wasn't roif truma, it's not roif truma, still, because there was truma in here, and truma is exempt from chala, we apply the Mishnah of chala that says that meduma is exempt of chala, even where roiv was chulin. So argues Rabbi Yochanan. Now, what's amazing from our Gemara is that Reish Lakish did not agree with Rabbi Yochanan in the Mishnah and Chala. He did not. Reish Lakish holds that when does the Mishnah and Chala say that meduma is exempt from Chala? Only if roiv was truma. That's fine. But Reish Lakish did not refute the case of our Mishnah, which would mean that both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish will both agree. Let's go to Daf Mem Aleph Amid Beis. That's the conclusion. That our Mishnah's leniency is even if it was not batal midoiraisa. Because if in our Mishnah, if they would have learned pshat like Shimon Barva, b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, that the black fig fell into at least 2 or 3 other black chulin figs, then you can't prove anything from our Mishnah. In other words, in our Mishnah, there is a biblical bittul. In the case of chala, if Rabbi Yochanan is right, there is no biblical bittul. Bittul of chulin and truma. I'm going in the opposite direction. But they did not say that. Let's read it inside. V'sivnei. Now, why didn't Reish Lakish refute Rabbi Yochanan's raya? Shanya bigulim. Our Mishnah is different because in our Mishnah, you're right. In our Mishnah, let me go back to the cake of the small cakes. What's the example that we gave? 1 truma small cake fell into 50 chulin small cake. Okay, there at least the truma stack of batal meat. There's a biblical bittul. Shanya bigulim shkvar bitlu. But in the case of the Mishnah in Chala, according to what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, the chulin was not batal. The chulin was not batal midoiraisa. Chulin can only be batal midoraisa if you have roiv truma. But he did not respond to that, which must mean that Reish Lakish agrees with Rabbi Yochanan that in our Mishnah's din is true, even if there's no bitul midoraisa. Which would mean, let me just go back to the case of Shimon Barva, that even if you had 99 white figs, only 1 black chulin fig. You have 100. 1 black, 1 truma black falls in. There isn't bittul of that black midoiraisa. Nevertheless, Rabbi Shua will hold that they're all batal. Note, we're not using the bittul beroiv to explain the leniency of Rabbi Yoshua. Now, the question will be, why would we be so lenient? So Rabbi Mendel is saying, good. The answer will be because of another derabanan. Because Truma is to begin with only midrabanan. The Gemara is not even going there. Could be. Could be. But it's not like Shimon ben Vaz said. Yes, Aviv. Okay, the reason why someone might have to review this Gemara is just for one nekuda. I got this yesterday. We're going mamash in opposite directions. In our Mishnah, we are looking for the truma to be batal beroiv midoiraisa. In the Mishnah and Chala, we're mamash going in the opposite direction, just to get that. But it's the same concept. No, it's the suggestion that Kahana had and Shmuel really Bisfara agreed with is that in challah, when do we say that meduma is exempt from challah? When roiv was truma, not roiv chulin. Just that. If you get that back and forth, there's no confusion over here. And yes, the logic behind, we can say, according to Reish Lakish and according to Rabbi Yochanan, the logic both behind the leniency in challah, why is even meduma exempt from challah? Challah is only midrabanan, bisman hazeh. The reason why, according to Rabbi Yeshua, holds that we're so lenient in the bittul, we're not rejecting bar pedoya. Yet, you got toichen umatir, but still, you didn't toichen it yet, because the whole thing is midrabanan. That would be a good svara. But they don't even say it. And let me tell you something, that kol haroy lebila, let me just, the source, we have a few minutes extra. By Menachos, the largest amount of flour that a person could donate at one time for a karban mincha is 60, either efa or sa. I think 60 sa. Someone can Google it. That's the biggest amount. Why is that? Because for every mincha donation, you have to add 1 loig of oil, never more, no matter how much flour. But the 1 loig of oil has to be in potential mixed with the flour. If you're going to donate more than 60, I think so, of flour at one time, you only put 1 loig of oil if it's one donation of a mincha offering. 1 loig of oil is not enough oil to be mixed in all of the flour. The problem is that when a person makes a mincha offering, they don't have to be boilel, they don't have to mix the oil in the flour. So if you don't have to mix it, you just have to pour it on top. So who cares if it's shaykh to mix it or not? So from there we learn that there are many things in halacha that even though you didn't do it, since you could do it, it's viewed as if you did it. Since it's possible for you to mix it, it's as if you mix it. Another din by chatzitza, for example, that when a woman goes to the mikvah to remove the tumas nida, so she cannot have a chatzitza even inside her mouth. The only thing is that we hold that a woman does not need to open her mouth under the water in the mikvah. So why do I care if there's protruding stitches coming out of her gums or other issues which might create a chatzitza? Waters don't even have to go into her mouth. It has to be kol haroim. It has to be able that if she were to open her mouth and waters were to go in and all of the external parts of the mouth, however that's defined, water will be able to touch all of the flesh without having anything interposing. And in many other areas. Okay, Chavre, now let's go weiter. And as we mentioned, first of all, before we go on to the case of black and black, even in the case of black and white, the leniency of Rabbi Yeshua is not only by figs. Figs, as we keep on mentioning, it's gooey, it's cookie. People would make them into cakes, press cakes. Even before you press them into cakes, they're already somewhat pressed together. So therefore, the 100, even though they're different colors, they're already together. It's like a volume thing. Wheat kernels, before you turn them into flour, every kernel, if it's dry, is completely separated from the other. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yosi, Tarvayin, B'Shem Rabbi Ze'era, say that the leniency of Rabbi Yeshua is even where you had chitin b'chitin. So let's say you have white, relatively white kernels of grain and black kernels of grain, same story. Let's go 50-50. You have chulin 50 white, you have chulin 50 black. You have 1 kernel of black truma. There, toichen umatir, the logic applies. But right now, they're bechlal not mixed together. Still, we say that since you are able to grind them all up together, and when you grind all of the wheat together, you cannot discern black and white, same logic, and you're not being marbe beheter, so we're going with the leniency. There, we don't say emavatlan is lechatchila. Even over there, Gavaldik, we say the shit of Rabbi Yeshua. And now let's move on. And what are we moving on to? Let's take away the black and the white. Let me go to this rule. When do we say aviv that you have to have the ratio of 100 to 1? That's only if it's trumas vadai. Whenever you begin with trumas safek, wherever you have a trumas safek, you do not need 100 to 1. You know what you need? Majority. Now, you had 20 figs Everything is white now. 20 white chulin figs. You have one white truma fig, aviv. It fell into the 20. What's the din? You don't have 100 to 1. So everything is meduma. What happens if now one fig fell out? Now you have 20 figs. You can maybe argue right now, maybe the one that fell out was the truma. So you don't know for sure that there's truma in here. Maybe this should now be ruled with the klal that safek truma only needs to have roiv for it to become batul. Let's read it inside. You had 20, let me go to white. You have 20 white chulin figs, and the nafla achas l'toichen, and one truma fig fell amongst it. You have now 21. This is a bona fide case where we say rabbinically everything is meduma, but now of the achas mihen, one of them flew out. And therefore what? As we're going to learn on a Mishnah Daf Chavav, that safek truma only needs to have roiv for it to become bottled, not 100 to 1. So therefore, the Shlakish says, Reb Shimon Shlakish Amar, okay, sveikoi bottle beroiv. And bottom line is, right now, the status, the whole thing changed. You began with one vadai truma falling in. Right now, I can argue we don't know for sure if there's any truma in there. So we use the rule of the Mishnah Daf Chavav that safek truma is batal b'roiv. Aber Rabbi Yechanan Amar, kulan nasu hoichiach. The Lashon Habavli is chazek isura. Look how different they think. If you really go into this, it's a whole different way of thinking. But it has the same bottom line. It began by one vadai truma falling in. Because of that, when you had a mixture of the 21, halacha paskind that what? That it's meduma. Just because one fell out, you can't undo what happened. Kulam nasu haychiach. All that are here are part of the rule before, which is, Hanan in other areas. We said meduma because there was a vadai isur. You can't undo retroactively of what happened. We already paskin because of one vadai falling in that the whole 21 is meduma. You can't change that. However, now listen to this, guys. Aber moide Rabbi Yechanan, that you can't retroactively change its status, but if now another step happened, something new happened, now I'll say that going forward, it's only safek. And there are two second steps that might have happened. Step number one, you have now, remember, you have 20 chulin, one truma, 21. Meduma. One flew out. Rabbi Yochanan says, the 20 that are here are meduma. Okay, someone took one of these 20, look at what happened, and they decided that they had tevel, and they said this should be truma for the tevel. By the way, if this would have been the chulin one, the chulin that we're talking about is tevel. Tevel can become truma. Truma cannot become truma. It's already truma. So Rabbi Yechanan will be moided that as far as this other new thing that you did, it's amazing. I will say, the one that you took out was taka chulin. Why is the one that you took out chulin? Because for step number 2, I'm moided to Reish Lakish. It's chazak esura, but it's still a suffix. There's still a suffix aspect over here. That she'im taram mehen al mokem acher. Case number 2 is even easier to understand. Aviv, you had 20. One fell in, 21. One fell out. How much do you have? 20. Rabbi Yechanan says, what's the status of the 20? Truma. What happens if now...
Not truma, meduma.
Meduma, thank you, Danny. What happens if right now 21 chulin falls on top of it? I love this roiv because we're going back to the chala roiv. So now you have roiv chulin, miut meduma, which is a suffix. Suffix is batal beroiv. Gavaldik. Oy shiri b'memokem acher aleim. Even Rabbi Yechanan is moida that for the second shaila, just fake on batal berov. In other words, the remaining 20 are presently a mixture of questionable truma. The current 20 figs are presently Safek Truma. If they are currently Safek Truma, right, Rabbi Mendel? So why don't we go back to Bittul B'Roif? Because we paskind on it that it's Meduma. Because when the one Truma fell in, it was Vadai. No, we don't undo it. But what we have right now is a question because one fell out. So if a new thing happens, then we apply the laws of Safek Truma. What a daf. Chavra, to be